Uh, there are lots of other accounts that might disagree and present other evidence. So the issue is, what are the accounts that you're hearing from? What is the information that you're not getting? Because clearly there are other people who don't believe the earth is flat. They've got a point of view and they've got some facts to back it up. In general, there are varying points of view, but there are some facts that are pretty much not in dispute. One is that the earth is not flat. Another is it's evening here in Boston. We are getting towards sunset, but yet there are other parts of the earth that are right now having a different season, having darkness instead of daylight. And multiple facts, multiple points of view can all coexist, but we have to understand that it's not as simple as, if my fact is true, your fact has to be false. We've gotten a lot of that from politics in the last few years. We've gotten a lot of it from people digging into their viewpoint on whatever the topic, and not able to hold more than one view at one time. So here are a couple of points that are along those lines, useful to keep in mind. Every photograph has something going on that's out of your view. Fortunately, you can see me from the waist up. You're going to have to take my word for it that what's here in this mug is water. If I tell you, and we've built trust up to this point, maybe you take my word for it. If you really want me to hold it up to the camera and prove that there's no brown liquor inside, then we get to a different level of trust and verify. Information that you think is relevant and helps you either build trust, gain credibility, understand better what the news is or what the information is that you're receiving. Photographers have to do a really good job of taking an image, either still or video, that gets the point across, gets the information conveyed, but also makes it understandable to somebody looking at it, so that they're not asking, well, what happened just out of the frame? What happened behind the photographer? There's lots of different ways that behind the scenes news gets to be a real issue of, how do you account for every possible viewpoint or stakeholder? There's a lot of questions about whose voice. In the case of, for example, the US Airways flight that dropped into the East River, there were no news journalists on the ground, in the water, on the shore. So all we had at that point was citizen journalists using their cameras to document what was going on from inside of the plane. This is a good point to stop and take a look at what else besides the story is going on. These are things that you need to keep in mind in terms of your response as an audience, as somebody who's trying to gather news and do it in a reasonable way. Fortunately, I have smart friends who are neuroscientists, because the panic reflex, the, oh my God, that's terrible news response, is part of what people call the lizard brain. It's the part of the brain called the amygdala that's all about flight response from danger, thinking of a worst case scenario. And fortunately, the amygdala does that sort of stop, take a second look at the facts, take a less panicky assessment of what's going on that you're seeing or hearing about, look for a simpler explanation rather than the worst case scenario. And your brain needs to sort of be trained to stop, think again, look for a simpler explanation, gather more facts, come up with a better explanation of what you're seeing. Another issue is who's profiting from telling you this information. The business motive of the activist accounts, the social media accounts that want you to click, that want you to send money, that need you to do something right away, need you to drop everything and be outraged. So the neuroscience part of be outraged, the social media reach of immediacy, that sort of, we're doing this right now and we need you to answer in the next 10 minutes. All of those are the business models that make you think about, okay, stop and let the prefrontal cortex do its rational thinking, because how is this going to help me? How is this going to help somebody else if I click, if I like, if I share, if I send you money? All of those are ways that your attention span becomes part of the business model. You get to participate in the news is the way that some accounts try to position it, but in fact, you're being used. You're being used as a repeater or an amplifier. And if you stop and think about that, you might decide, no, that's not really for me. That's not what I want to do in interacting with the news. Deciding what's important enough that you're going to participate or go deeper or gather facts. That's another part of the, of the discussion, the business model of what information are you giving up? You and I are not seeing the same thing on our home screens, because if you're in Quincy using Comcast, and I'm not in Quincy and I'm using Verizon in another town in my secure bunker, not in the city limits, there's a better than average chance that the ads that are served, the sites that I'm seeing, the information that I'm getting is different. It's what's called a filter bubble. The more pictures of cute cats you click on, the more pictures get served to you of cute cats, because the server ad network knows that you click, you get fed more information, more messages, more pictures, more, of your friends in your feed, because the algorithms behind that know what activates you and what doesn't. So again, that's a combination of the neuroscience and the business. It's as relevant for news on the internet because everybody sees something different. It's not like a TV broadcast where it's just sent out to thousands or millions of people. It really is personalized, and you can get as specific as you want in terms of micro targeting your neighborhood, your block, the Citizen app that gives you information from your local police at a very micro targeted level. But often think about the other side of the telescope, widening the focus so that you're not just getting only your friends and family in your filter bubble, only the channels that you agree with from a political viewpoint, from an issue viewpoint. We're going to start getting into some of the tools that are online with sites that you can go to fact check, tools that you can use when you get information to decide, is this important? Is this a story that deserves more attention? Here's one more piece of the psychology of news that's sort of relevant because of the QAnon conspiracy theory, the ways that people like to think that if they've seen 3 news stories in a row about traffic, then traffic is a big deal and it really matters and it's super important. That may or may not be the case, but we like to have patterns. We like to have explanations rather than just assuming that it's a random day, you're stuck in a traffic jam, you were hit by a rainstorm. So it really matters what you think in terms of keeping an open mind, not getting so tied down to a specific reason why that you can't think about other parts and pieces of what you're seeing as the daily news. Here's a basic smell test. Does it pass the smell test? Is it fishy? Are the details sketchy, unclear? Do we not know who the source of the information is? An awful lot of news comes from official sources. So a press release that was given to a lot of news media organizations, a press conference where members of the press can ask questions. So tonight, think of yourself as members of the press, and you can ask me questions and trust or hope that I'm going to give you a straight, fact-based, no bull answer, because essentially you're now in the position of being the fact finders, deciding if I'm credible, deciding if the information is useful and usable, and I hope having some idea of whether social news or whether going to other websites to see if I've done this for other libraries gives you any greater confidence that the information I give you is going to be the same answer I gave to Newton or Hopkinton or other places in the classroom where I've talked to students, or in some cases older adults who are very set in their news gathering, so that they watch the TV news at 6 and 11. That's how they get information. They may not go to a website during the day and try to fact check their information or talk to other people and get a different interpretation of a particular set of facts. And since I've been talking at you for the better part of 25 minutes, now's a good time to either unmute if there are questions you want to ask by voice. There's a question in the chat we can get to, Carrie.
Yeah, so the schools teach the CRAT method as part of their media literacy. And so that stands for currency, relevancy, authority, accuracy, and purpose. Is there a preferred acronym that students should be using? Is one better than the other?
There really isn't. These are variations of the same general principle of, does it matter to you? Is it from a credible source? Is it relevant? Is it designed to motivate you to do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do? If you didn't wake up this morning hopping mad about a particular issue and you saw a news story that made you angry, you need to think about the neuroscience. You need to think about the business model of the activist organization. Are they trying to get you to donate? The CRAP model or method is interchangeable with the smell test or other models, because you have to decide what is it that you're doing. Are you personalizing the information and trying to decide if it matters to you, or are you trying to fact check it and verify for reasons of, I'm going to verify this before I share with somebody else. I'm going to tell somebody why this matters to me for political reasons, for emotional reasons, for social reasons, for the reasons of coming up with an argument. It may be something as simple-minded as, I don't like a particular piece of music. I'm not going to tell you that it stinks. I'm going to tell you the reasons why I don't like it. One of the exercises I use with students is, don't tell me your opinion. Tell me a detail that illustrates. So don't tell me it's an ugly hat. Describe it for me in such a way that as a reader, as a viewer, if I'm not seeing it, I can understand and make an opinion of my own of, gee, that's really an ugly hat. Unless it's something that is so out there and obvious, like an ugly Christmas sweater, and you're doing a story about, gee, this is Kenneth, and Kenneth really grooves on having the ugliest ugly sweater. And at that point, it's not an opinion, it's Kenneth's opinion, and it's something that he thinks is relevant to his story. Here's a good spot to talk about the ways that you may be unaware that you're not really on the right website. You're not really getting the details you want from the source you think is the correct or legit outlet. It requires a little bit of homework. It requires being old enough or locally knowledgeable enough that you know certain sites are spoofed or fake, or they sound legit, but they might not be. Especially this example of hovering, using your cursor if you happen to have multiple windows that you can open. It's harder to do with a messaging app. It's harder to do with multiple windows on your phone or on your tablet, that you would take the time from reading a story, seeing a message, and then opening a window to do the fact check. Or in an even stranger example, taking it to a reference librarian and saying, let's pressure test this. Let's look at who owns a particular website. Let's look at a name that doesn't necessarily sound like it's on the level. The Philadelphia Ledger is a long defunct and out of business news organization. The URL is available. There have been stories in the Washington Post and the New York Times about political campaigns claiming the names of fake news organizations, fake news organizations like the Philadelphia Ledger, the Tampa Daily Times, because the newspaper in Tampa is not the Daily Times. There used to be lots more newspapers, but many of them have folded. They've been consolidated over the years, but it's still possible to get a URL and build a site that sounds like it's serious. I'm going to go.
David, I had one question. I had someone also ask on social media, with so few corporations now controlling all of our media, how can we really trust from source to source that we're getting accurate information?
I think that's where, again, it depends. We're pretty fortunate in the Boston area that most of our news outlets are owned by organizations that are, I'm going out on a small limb here to try and make friends in Quincy, because of the Patriot Ledger and other local news outlets that are a local news source. They're a counterweight to the Herald and the Globe as a newspaper, that you have multiple radio stations. The places where this has gotten to be a real big issue is in smaller media markets, in smaller rural towns where there may only be one newspaper. The TV station may be owned by a company called Sinclair Broadcasting. You may have heard, if you're a news junkie or you follow the media business, Alden Global Capital, the the fund that owns the Boston Herald, that has cut a lot of talent and a lot of resources. So yeah, the ownership definitely plays a big role. If you know the point of view of the owners, if you know that they come from a political viewpoint that aligns with yours. For example, the Herald is fairly conservative. The Globe gets knocked for being super liberal and super progressive. So the Wall Street Journal, in the same way, is considered pro-business. You may find that Pacifica News or other national news organizations that have a worldview are part of how you decide is your media diet, what you think is both reliable and, if not reliable and objective, then at least neutral. I suggest in some cases that people go to a Canadian English language website, or there are various outlets from Europe, the BBC or DW, where you can get news about the US from a foreign viewpoint. That's harder to do, obviously, at the very, very local level. But the more diversity you get of viewpoints, the fewer stories you're going to get that sound like 382 people were killed on an airplane, 3 Americans, where everything is America first or US first, or taken out of a global or a national or an international context. Let me know if that answers the question, or if there are specific either ownership or bias issues that we should get into. I'm going to stop share and make a new share for a minute, because we can go to a tool called All Sides, and feel free to either thumbs up or wave or something if you've used any of the tools like Fact Check or PolitiFact or All Sides or Red Blue. These are all ways of looking at the same story from a different viewpoint. Perhaps you get a conservative paper like the Boston Herald, and you'd like to look at the same story about a political figure or a national story from a different sociological viewpoint, a different political viewpoint, a different geography, because it may be relevant in certain ways in one part of the US than another part of the US. This is a live window. This is a link to the Washington Post story I referenced earlier, the ways that websites that you're seeing are not necessarily news organizations. This was a story about a PR firm that set up a website called checksandbalances.com. It turned out that Checks and Balances had a point of view in favor of a medical clinic that was competing with Centara. You might not find that kind of level of detail, say, for example, on All Sides, but a national story or a thing like virus coverage, things like national and international news, give you the opportunity of seeing more of what other geographies are about. Back here at the All Sides window, you get a chance to start by identifying your bias. What are the things that you care about? Identifying for yourself if your point of view on certain issues like the environment or politics or college tuition or transportation, are they left-leaning and liberal? Are they right-leaning and conservative? And what news are you getting? Are you looking at Newsmax? Are you looking at MSNBC? How are your decisions of where you get news aligning with what issues that you think are important? Perhaps if you're an environmental activist or environmental carer, you get information from your local Sierra Club. That's going to come with a pro-environment point of view. It may not be wrong, but it may be out of balance with issues that are things that you believe deserve equal weight, not just, the issues that that activist organization has as part of the agenda. Question?
So we do have a question in the chat.
Thank you, Kevin Chen. So a .org is generally more reliable? No, I wouldn't use that as a rule, or it is a general, I guess a point of order here to talk about domains. Kevin's question is whether .org websites are inherently more trustworthy than .com or other domains. Generally, .org is a domain given to nonprofits. .gov indicates that it's coming from a government agency. We could do a whole separate program on different domains and how you know what is the source of the information. .com is sort of universally understood as a business or commercial domain. So yes, you could argue with me that the website deadlines.com is more commercial than deadlines.org. If I was a bad actor and I was able to get a .org website and make it look like a think tank or make it look like an activist organization by calling it .org, whatever the domain is, then yes, potentially I could try to get some facts past the goalie and confuse or mislead Kevin. But I'm hoping that by now Kevin has sort of figured out that you have to go deeper. You have to sort of look at the website itself and decide for yourself if the content is fact-based, whether it's useful to you, if it passes either the crap or the smell test. So you can look by subject on all sides. You can search by bias on all sides. I'll look at one more resource that's useful. What all sides essentially does is rank and constantly update different news stories from the left, from the right, from a pro or con balance. And they use this guideline of very left-leaning, centrist, and fact-based. So this is where you tend to see news organizations like the AP, like Reuters, like the New York Times News. You would find the New York Times opinion pages, here on the left. You'd find Fox News opinion here on the right. You'd find Fox News, if it's not a news program, again, you decide how far to the left or right all of these are in terms of, do they line up with your political point of view? Do they line up with what you think is the facts that are relevant to you? Let's go back to the screen share. And if there are websites that you want to see, if there are stories that you want to dig into a little more deeply, we can do that. That's one of the benefits of being live with an internet. And I think that generally Uh, are you seeing the next slide? Are we back to the presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I think that in general, the rules of thumb are getting harder and are getting more interesting uh, because of this. This is a recent addition. I want to draw your eye to a tweet that is right here, and it's a single letter. So this is also Kevin's get out of jail free card, because I'm talking with all of you, not just Kevin, about the level of granular detail that you and I have to get through in a day in deciding whether a news organization is passing these tests. This is really critical. We're down to the point where a hacker can use one letter in a URL. And if you don't know that the A of this style is the correct typeface for what you're using, you might very well be clicking on a link that looks like Citibank, but the A is a Cyrillic alphabet from a Russian keyboard. So it is clearly, if you know what you're looking, it is a hacker redirect or an attempt to get you to click on the wrong link. There's this constant cat and mouse game, not just in the news business, of engaging the audience or trying to make the information valuable, but trying to get interaction, trying to get questions and answers, trying to get you to click where ordinarily you might not. So it really has gotten to be more difficult to just have a sit back and get the news experience on the internet, on a website, because so much of what's being pushed to you, not just ads, it requires you to click through. It requires some sort of interaction that may or may not be terribly easy for you to spot what's fake and what's not. I'm going to say it's not always a clue as far as the validity of a site. It's one of the tells. If you're not a Citibank customer and you're getting an email from Citibank, you should know that it's probably a phishing or hack attempt. In your email has been compromised. So there's a website called Have I Been Owned? Please raise a hand, give me a attaboy. It's the URL have I been pwned.com. You can check to see if your email address has been compromised in some way. There are lots of different ways that you may be getting served up websites. You may be getting emails in your inbox that you don't know how you got found by a particular list or sender, but for whatever reason, it's there now. And you've got to figure out, do I click and proceed? Do I, open up a new window, or do I avoid it until, I know for sure? For example, the IRS does not contact you by email. They will only send you a mailed letter to your address of record from your tax. So you won't get a phone call, you won't get an email, but there are fraudsters out there who place calls from spoofed numbers. They send you emails that are spoofed from irs.gov websites. So all of those are ways that potentially, unless you knew certain details, you would not have that information right at hand. Moving right along. So here are a couple of examples. Again, you can spend as much time on fact checking as you have time hours in the day. You can go down all kinds of rabbit holes with or without crazy conspiracy theories, with or without nutty Reddit and subreddit and Facebook groups. You can look at Whois records to see who owns a particular website, if they've left that information out in view in a registry. You can use different photo and reverse image searches to see if a photo has been cropped to include or cut out particular information. Has a photo been altered in Photoshop? All of these are ways that things that you're seeing are potentially not legit, not fact-based, but taken over by somebody who has a motivation, to get you to do something that you wouldn't ordinarily do. This is another good spot to stop, ask if you're already doing fact checking on your news, if you're already getting second and third and fourth opinions. A couple of other shout out organizations I would mention, and they're not part of the slide, is there's an entire study of misinformation and the ways that people and different organizations, businesses, political or activist groups are trying to get you engaged with their media. There are college level courses in both the technology that makes it possible, the psychology that is part of you're invited, you're special, you're part of our in the know, very limited opportunity. The ways that especially are used in a way to motivate you to action, to make a donation, to interact right away so that you don't miss out. These are high pressure sales tactics. They're not in the way that journalism is typically neutral or quiet in the delivery of facts. If you're naming, blaming, shaming, yelling, those are typically clues that you're getting news not from information, but from an opinion, somebody who's angry about something, someone who wants to blame a particular action on an explanation that they control or that they prefer, not from a set of facts that might be independently verified. There are study centers at the Poynter Institute in Florida, at News Literacy Project. There's a annual conference called missinfo.com, where people who are engaged in the various aspects of this come together, because it really is a combo platter of educators, technologists, the policymakers, because there isn't a very strong legal framework about misleading someone online. There are laws about mail fraud or conning someone out of money, but it's very difficult to know online who you're dealing with. So the laws that are connected to misleading someone, catfishing them on Tinder, is very different than, bilking thousands of dollars from Aunt Mildred because she thought that she was making a donation to a legitimate cat rescue fund. And it turns out it was not a legitimate cat rescue fund. So another couple of questions that I often get is not necessarily about activists, but about focused news that's specific to an issue or specific to an interest. And there's a lot more of that thanks to the internet, and you can get a viewpoint on the day's news in just about any possible interpretation. There's by ethnicity, by location, by age group, by political affiliation. We already know there are left, right, there are rich, poor, there are web services or crawlers and searches that you can do for just about any issue, and you can see what other news organizations around the globe have to say about it. And some will be very upfront about their point of view or their bias or their preference. Others might not be. So if you believe that your information needs to come from a female, younger vantage point, websites like the Skim, SKIMM, or the 19th, which are run by younger women journalists, that may be your news organization of choice. We're going to see a demographic shift over the next few years of more people getting into journalism at a age and stage where they're not just looking at news wires, at newspapers, at TV stations. They're looking at some of these interest-based groups as a primary source. So grist.com if you're an environmentalist, the Marshall Project if you have a particular interest in law enforcement and the ways that social justice in policing or the courts and issues like no money bail. The Marshall Project covers those issues in very, rigorous and fact-based depth across all 50 states. So they're very focused on those issues of justice in law enforcement and equity in law enforcement in ways that perhaps your hometown newspaper doesn't have the resources anymore, or your TV network is not going to cover that issue if that's a topic that matters to you. That's, I think, where I would draw a distinction between an activist organization that has a point of view on an issue versus a news outlet that's trying to give you information about this topic without pushing an agenda, without being pro or con on a particular subject. If that's unclear, we can dive into some other examples that might be a little more broad-based or understandable, but they tend to focus around issues that are really kind of hot button, like environment, like traffic, like law enforcement, where it's a pretty clear pro-con rather than 5 or 6 different issues related to a particular subject. And I think that's, especially on the South Shore, you may have seen it in the activist groups that are reporting on the Weymouth compressor. A good time for radio silence or the very last of the slides? So the very last of the 2 slides are more websites and resources that you can use. If you would like a copy of these slides, they'll be on the YouTube. They'll be on, various places on the web. This slideshow changes virtually every workshop we do because, like the feedback on the CRAP method, there may be lots of other sites that you use that I haven't added yet. So my window is always open if you want to throw them either in the chat or send me a message. The last couple of either sites or issues, are particularly about the people who are trusted experts in a variety of these different fields, because things are changing pretty quickly, particularly in the world of COVID, where what was fact or what was best practice a couple of weeks ago now has changed. So you need to be aware, if you're clicking on a story, looking at a date, looking at a citation that tells you this is the most recent information. The web is not very good about making sure that your search results at the top are the newest, particularly if you're using Google as a verb. Google shows you what is most popular, most clicked. It's not showing you the newest or the most reliable or the closest geographically to you. So all of those are different ways of deciding what search engine you're going to use and how you're going to rank order what matters, what's relevant in terms of recency, accuracy, what matters in my town, in my county, in my state. So I'm going to stop because heck, it's 8 o'clock and we've been doing this a while. We've got a half an hour for either sites that we can visit or stories that we can dig into a little more deeply. Issues, there is never a shortage of political viewpoints that we can talk about, pro, con, and indifferent. My background primarily is in the business and tech, so that's my disclaimer way of saying I tend not to talk too much about the politics of what side are you on, because it doesn't really matter to me who you voted for, only that you voted. Thanks, Ryan, for a buzzword. I think there are a variety of them, and my comfortable place. There are lots of different buzzwords or things that you can use to screen. An example with me under the bus. I was not an employee of the New York Times. So if I wrote a story, it said special to the New York Times, or it had a box that said I was a contributor. There are things that you can identify as, for example, Dr. Sanjay Gupta is a doctor. He's not a reporter. He may use journalism tactics, but he is first a contributor to CNN. So what he's saying is not going to be medical advice. It's not going to be medical journalism necessarily, but it is information from a trusted source. So look for certain things that are tells from the reporter, from the talking head, indicator that they're not a journalist. They might be a first person viewer of what happened, what the reporters call man on the street. Sorry, ladies, there are also references to person on the street. But typically, if you go to an accident scene as a reporter, you look for a witness. You look for somebody who was there when the tornado touched down. So again, you're getting the viewpoint of somebody who was there, not necessarily the meteorologist or the journalist compiling the story. Inside of a news package or inside of a report, look for the number of times that the person uses I, me, my, our, especially in political coverage. That's a clue that they're talking about their party, their issue, their team. So a Republican who uses our is referring to perhaps the Republican Party, perhaps a subset of the Republican Party if it's a caucus. Our might refer to their home state delegation. So this is why I'm hedging on your question of there aren't hard and fast rules. but there are certain behaviors, certain psychological terms that come from somebody who isn't well trained in the dark persuasive arts. Another one is obviously. Somebody who's putting facts out as obvious is telegraphing to you that this is my point of view, you should be on board with it, and we can agree that the world is flat. So if we obviously know that the earth is flat, comma, Ryan, all of those are tactics that are used by conversationalists in what's called mirroring, getting you to buy in by making it sound persuasive, using your name in a sentence so it's personalized, citing a fact from news reports when it's, yes, there was a news report that Kyrie said the earth is flat. That is not the same as a journalist saying scientists agree the earth is flat. Have I answered the question, or must debate club continue? Moving on.
I actually have some questions from some of our social media sites
Better.
that I wonder if you'd be interested in answering. Someone wanted to know if we should be concerned about how much bias is being injected into our media.
I caught part of the question. I think the issue of how much, again, is a personal decision, and your tolerance for OAN on the one end of the spectrum and Newsmax versus Pacifica Radio on the very liberal side of the political agenda. Everybody has a tolerance for BS that is different from my own. In general, you will get less of it and less point of view or less opinion with the more centrist and more fact-based news organizations. There's a really powerful tool. It's called logging off, turning off the TV and the radio, because there's a pattern of recognition. Again, the psychology, the more you hear the news story, the more you think it's important, the more you think it has relevance to you, when in fact the cable companies, the radio companies, they're just trying to fill up 24 hours of space. So there is a point of diminishing returns for everybody. Lord knows when my mom would watch TV cable news, it was really hard to get her to disengage and turn it off, because it's nice to have somebody talking to you. It's background noise, but it does have a certain amount of impact because you're hearing it again and again and again in terms of headlines. So I don't know if this is an answer to the question, but I think that the more prepared you are to know what point of view comes with your news and where to get an opposing view or a fact check or a confirming diagnosis, that's just part of now what it means to be a news consumer, because we're not, as an audience, going to see the same news except for a very a thin sliver of time on national news broadcasts. And those audiences are getting smaller and smaller. And they're leading with things that are cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to get in terms of video, traffic, weather, sports. Everybody has those three things nationally. So you're going to see a lot more of traffic, weather, sports, entertainment, because those are some of the categories where there is truly a national audience, because we can all agree traffic stinks, weather is going to happen, and who doesn't love fill in the blank name of an entertainer, movie star, singer. where they're going to be the story if Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez are back together again.
So to follow up to that, so for me growing up, it was always, when we talked about journalism, it was with the belief that we should be seeking like an unbiased, unvarnished, just the facts sort of reporting. Should we sort of come to grips with the reality that that's no longer the way journalism is reported, and that there is bias in everything? And if we want sort of a balanced intake as opposed to an unbiased reporting?
I think you've used loaded terms that I would like to unload. And I think after an hour, there's a level of trust that I would like to give you another point of view that is, by definition, poking fun at me. If it is offensive to anyone who's listening, tell me and I will explain, because this is a joke at my expense. Full disclaimer, I was raised by lawyers. That's why I have to do this. Everyone has a bias. Everyone has a life experience that informs how they got to this point. So to say that all news is not objective is both true, but it sounds like it's a judgment. So in the same way that a diet or a personality or a phone is a thing, you can have a good diet, you can have a bad, you can have a nice personality, you can have a really evil personality. Everybody's got, but the more self-aware they are, again, their preferences come into play. I've given you facts and information, I've given you points of view. There are probably people out there who would say, you're not in the business right now, you're an old white guy who did this work and is not giving me the viewpoint of a young African-American resident of fill in the blank. And I need my news to come from that person, because only that person reflects my experience or can accurately give me the details I need. That may be the case. There are lots of young people from a particular place, background, they want a skateboard report from somebody who skateboards, not from an old white guy sitting in a chair doing a Zoom. So the bias in that case is, get yourself a selfie stick, get out on a skateboard, do the skateboard report, and find that audience. We're in a position now where everybody can be a journalist. Not everybody can be fact-based, rigorous, getting to sources, getting information from official sources, getting reliable information. I can give you a skateboard report. So I think that's where I unpack the terms like bias and point of view and opinion. And I would replace that with, if you are, for whatever reason, only going to trust information that comes from people in your demographic, in your area, in your socioeconomic group, you can probably find somebody who's willing to fill that niche. But I think that in general, what that has done is given us the exact kinds of people who only listen to their neighbors, people like them, left-handed carpenters who only listen to other left-handed carpenters.
Thank you. And then I think I just had one other question.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much you would have on this, but someone had asked about Section 230 and how much that has changed media, especially because so much of it is now online.
Wow. Yeah. Again, just like the technology, we could do another hour on Section 230. What was killed during the Reagan administration is something called fair use. where if I told you that the earth was flat during a political campaign, the rules of TV media until the middle 1980s required somebody else to have equal time to dispute that as a fact, as part of a political campaign. We're in a totally unknown area because television news was regulated in that way. The internet is in this bizarro world of it's not regulated like media. There are not licenses in the way that TV and radio stations used to get licensed by the government to use the airwaves. Gee, I'm old. Section 230 and the constitutional rights to free speech, all of those are what allows websites, what allows free speech and social media freedom. And it's one of the reasons why Facebook, Twitter, all of the different social media platforms are having a really hard time with how do you punish people who use that platform to spread misinformation, to run for-profit scams that would never be possible on the TV or radio. So Section 230 is part of the issue. There are a lot of legislators who want to try to rein in or make it clear what the rules of the road are going to be, because they were never defined in the 20 years or more that we've had a World Wide Web. Police itself, it hasn't done a really good job of policing itself. And again, the best you can do is log off, delete your accounts, get out. But what we've seen is that the social media platforms do an outstanding job of giving you just enough convenience or just enough of the positive resources that you're willing to pull up with an awful lot of do-it-yourself nonsense, because no local, state, or federal government is going to regulate who can yell fire on a crowded website.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions I had from other sites. I don't know if anyone else in the room has questions. Feel free to ask them before we wrap up.
Yeah, last call. If anyone wants to jump in, and we can also be off the record if you'd rather use the chat to ask a question anonymously. All of those are good ways of not throwing yourself under the bus. So thanks for the chat window.
Yes, we've had a number of people on our social media site as well say that they are really appreciating the resources that you're providing.
Outstanding. Glad to help. There are a couple of libraries and organizations that we haven't reached yet. That'll probably happen over the summer and fall. We'll find out what are the stories that wind up there. I'm hoping it's not going to be the hippo crab, but you never know.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it's evolving, I think, so rapidly as a medium. There's been a lot of change in such a short period of time. It's hard to sort of keep up with who you should be following and who you should maybe give a little bit more attention to.
So I'll do my own fact check, because Daniel Dale is no longer doing this. He was basically the full-time fact checker during the Trump speech presidency. So he has mercifully moved on to a lighter weight responsibility. But we'll try and find someone else to fill that spot the next time we have to use the slide.
Well, thank you so much, David. This has been very, very informative, and I think much needed, especially in the climate that we're in right now. With so much access to information and hard to know what to filter it through. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
I'll grab the chat and move right along. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.